Welcome, everyone. If you've just joined us, we are just letting people into the room.
While we give everyone just a minute or two to join, could I please request you to modify your names to for it to be your name and the name of your organization? It will help us later in the session.
And I think you can do that by right-clicking or double-clicking on your picture, and then it should give you an option to rename.
Yeah, I think we can begin. We are 2 minutes past, so let's get started and I'll keep letting people in as they come in.
Great. So yeah, welcome everyone to our webinar on navigating government budgets for non-state education organizations. I'm Chiara, I'm an innovation manager at GSF. I'm joined by some of my colleagues, Tejaswini and Hervé, and we've got the wonderful Christine, who's going to be the speaker for our session. This is the first out of the two sessions that we're going to be running. We're going to run a whole series. This is session number one, and you'll also have an opportunity to join us next week, same time, also on Zoom, to continue the exploration of this topic of navigating government partnerships, particularly from this budget perspective. I'll tell you just a little bit about setup for the session, any practicalities, a little bit about GSF, and then I'll hand over to our speaker, Christine. So, as you're joining in, please write your name in the chat and your organization and just which part of the world you're joining us from. We're a very diverse community, and it's always a nice moment to get a sense of where people are coming from. If we also can ask you to please change your display name on Zoom to make sure it includes your name and the name of your organization. This will really help us later because we'll be working in some breakout rooms, and it will be the most helpful and the most beneficial if you work with people from the same organization. But we need to know which organization that is. So please do change your name. I think you need to right click on your picture, and then at the bottom of that, it should give you an option to rename. A little bit of setting guidelines and expectations for how we want to run the session. So this is a really safe space for you to share opinions and experiences, and we really encourage you to participate um, and be engaged with the content. If you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand in Zoom, and you can also use virtual reactions to engage, just to share a little bit how any kind of reactions to the content that's being shared. If possible, please keep your camera on. This always helps to create more of a sense of who is in the room. We do understand this might not be possible for everyone, but if it is, please do turn your camera on. In terms of expectations, we would really love your full attention. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn. We've got an amazing speaker to share on this topic. So please, as much as possible, switch off from other tasks and notifications on your laptop or your phone for the duration of the meeting, just so that you also get the most out of this opportunity. Engage with each other. Feel free to ask questions, build on each other's ideas, appreciate what other people are sharing via the reactions or in the chat, and be as open and possibly, if you would like, you can share your contact information to connect with others as well who are interested in this topic. A little bit about GSF. Probably for some of you, this is really familiar content if you've been here with us for a while, but there might be some newer people as well, less familiar with our organization. So I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are. So GSF, the Global Schools Forum, our vision, why we exist, and what we do in the world, the vision really is that all children, no matter where they're from, their background, can realize their potential through safe access to good quality education. And really, we are a community. At the center of GSF is a community that collaborates together of really locally rooted organizations, local innovators who often work with governments, often work with other partners to basically help realize that vision to improve education at scale for children that are underserved in low and middle income countries. You can see on the right, the countries highlighted are the countries where our members come from. We now have members from 70 countries in the world, coming close to 200 organizations in our network, collectively running 1.39 million schools and educating 139 million children. So the reach is really broad, and it's a very diverse network of school operators as well as organizations which support schools and provide critical services to non-state school organizations. So what do we do with this community? How do we support this community that we've got? We help to unlock meaningful collaboration. We support in creating stronger know-how, unlocking smarter funding, and creating system-level partnerships. So that's what we do. And we are here to support for this particular session. Obviously, it touches on creating system level partnerships and working with government, but also taps into this collaboration aspect between all of us in the network, sharing our knowledge and tapping into stronger know-how from amazing experts that we are often joined by in these sessions. So let me tell you a little bit about Christine. We're very glad to have Christine, who's going to be our facilitator for the session today. She is the founder of SALT Analytics. She specializes in economic and financial analysis of global development projects, humanitarian crises, and government budgets. Her work spans more than 80 countries, so it's very close to the 70 countries that our network spans. And probably a huge number of overlap between the countries that we work in and you work in, Christine. Her work really focuses on effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and sustainability, which are terms extremely relevant to our network and the solutions that we are collectively building together. So she served at some really high-level, high-profile projects, such as being the lead cost analyst on the Gates-funded Literacy at Scale and Numeracy at Scale programs, was the primary cost analyst for USAID Global Education Portfolio, and she holds multiple relevant degrees for Harvard and Columbia universities. So really, really warm welcome to you, Christine. I think this is my last slide, so I'm going to stop sharing and then we can dive in straight into the session. And if you've just joined us, just another reminder to please change the name, your name on Zoom so that it shows your name and the name of your organization so that we can be working to put you into the right breakout rooms for later in the session.
All right, I will kick in from here. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction and for setting the stage. For those of you who have not introduced yourself, please feel free to do so. For those who already have, hello, friends. I see lots of friends in the room. It makes my heart so happy to see your names here. And for friends I haven't met yet, welcome, welcome. So let me tell you how I like to run my sessions. I'm very casual. I'm very informal. I want you to interrupt me at any time with questions in the chat. We will take them as they come. But as already mentioned, this is a place to ask all the questions that you want, whether you think they're obvious or not, just ask them. Just do it, okay? All right, let me share my slides. Okay, one sec. Let me go to slideshow. Okay. All right, let's get started here. All right, so what's the motivation for this? I don't think it is an underestimation to say that in the last year, we have had a cataclysmic shift in development and humanitarian aid. And now there seems to be even more of a focus and emphasis from all stakeholders across the field, from governments to donors, implementers, to justify every single dollar that is spent, because money is terrible. Money is just really, really tight. And so how we spend it makes all the difference. There's an increased focus on cost-effective solutions because we really have to be leaning in and put that money where it's going to work its hardest, and using those cost-effective solutions as justification for implementers in particular to obtain and leverage additional funding. There's also an increased focus on integration with governments to institutionalize for sustainable and scalable solutions. Okay, so this is where we are, right? Now I want to pause for a second, and I would just like to ask you to put in the chat at this moment two questions, and you can answer whichever question you want. One, are you currently working with the government or a government in any way to implement your solution? So tell me in there if that's applicable to you, or if that's not applicable to you, just tell me in general about how you're feeling about understanding government budgets and even the state of the world. Just give me a little, sometimes it's hard because I can see all of you, but I can't see your faces, so I can't read kind of where you are in this moment. And so it would be really helpful to tell me, are you currently working with governments and budgets, and how do you feel about that on your solution, and just in general about how you're feeling about this moment. So I'm going to pause for a second and just let you talk to me for a second in the chat, if you don't mind, please. Thank you, Paul. With EOF. Link always co-design programs to government to implement solutions. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Ashwar. Luminous. It is such a difficult time, Caroline. Like, it's really, nobody's going to pretend. It is rough. It is rough. Okay. Hi, Aunt. Okay. All right, I'll let you guys keep talking to me, but I'm going to go back and forth and see what you're saying, okay? So as we go, just talk to me. All right, so here's the purpose. So as Kara said, we have these two sessions, one happening now, of course, which is going to be understanding government financing. And we've got two primary focus for this session, is to explore how governments think about cost and budgets and to align your solutions to that government thinking. Okay. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. I'm watching you. Okay, session 2 is we're going to actually stress test one solution for scale and sustainability, and to provide like a practical framework that you can actually use to assess cost-effective, sustainable, and scalable solutions. We're going to stress test your solutions and integrate with government budgets. But for today, we're going to just understand government financing. Okay? Remember, ask me questions as we go. I'm watching you. Session 1, here's kind of our agenda. I don't know why the format whacked out on me, but it did. We're going to talk about new terms. We're going to talk about misconceptions. I'm going to give you an example from South Africa, an early childhood math example. We're going to have a government resources exercise, and then we're going to talk. We're going to talk amongst ourselves, and then have some key points. I have other topics that we can talk about if we get to them. If we don't get to them, fine. We'll just do what we can and maximize the most of our time together. All right, so I'm only going to give you a few terms, just 4. And you should actually already know probably most of these terms. Everybody knows what a budget is, right? This is how you think you're going to spend money. Expenditures are actually how you spend the money. As we're creeping up on the holidays, my budget versus my expenditures are very different things in this house, to the chagrin of other people in my house. However, so budgets versus expenditures, we're all clear on the difference between those two things. Incremental cost is how much more it is to produce something. Like, for example, let's say you have a student, just take a student, and it might cost however much more the incremental difference to serve a different type of student. So it's that difference. And then financing is just how something will be paid for. Where is that money going to come from? Okay, everybody good with the 4 definitions? Just give me a thumbs up if you're feeling good about that. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Okay, anybody have questions? You just asked me. Thank you, guys. Okay, here's some common misconceptions that I run into. Thanks, Evan. About misconceptions about working in a government system. Sam, we're going to give you these slides. One, misconceptions about working in a government system. It's A, it's done quickly. B, there's unlimited funding for your solution. I have no idea why. Some organizations believe that like the magic ticket is to get government funding. It's not. Stop that. Don't think like that. As a matter of fact, it's very different from that. Governments are very tight on funding. So whatever misconception you had about unlimited funding coming from the government, let me disabuse you of that thinking right now. There's also misconceptions about political wins. Political wins are going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect your solutions. It's going to affect the priorities of the government, and you have to be really in tune to those. Another misconception is that ministers of ed are the only decision makers. Nope, no. We also have lots of other stakeholders involved, primarily ministers of finance, of course. There's a misconception that solutions will not change from how they are originally designed. Likely, depending on how it was designed, if it was designed from integration from the start, you have a better shot of it remaining true to the original design. But if it wasn't, you're going to experience change. The name of your solution is going to change, and that feels very emotional to some people about, this was our baby, this is what we called it. Once it integrates into the government system, the name goes away. And that can feel very different for some organizations. Just understand that. And also that there's misconception that there are hundreds of other organizations just like you that have the same goal. And so the competition is intense. So what we're trying to do here is give you a little leg up from the competition. The final misconception that I think is the biggest, though, is if you tell the government the cost of a solution, they will know how to finance it. That may or may not be true. And so the point of this particular session is to help you with that part right there, because it's all about the money. Okay, so what? So the reason we're doing this is so you can be sensitive to these government nuances. And if you are, you will have higher chances of being successful in your collaborations with the government than to those organizations and individuals who are not. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody so far? If so, just tell me yes or give me a thumbs up so I can see you're with me still. Okay, thank you, Caroline. Okay, we're good? All right, thank you. Okay, I'm moving on, but ask me questions. All right, so I'm going to roll into this example. This is South Africa's early childhood math example. So it was implemented, thank you, Sammy, by the Western Cape Education Department and the University of Cape Town's Development Unit. There were several different funders in this. There was Elmra, there was Investec, there was Matria, there was ZX, there was so a host of different funders. So what I want you to take from that first box is that this was very much a collaborative effort. It wasn't just a one-off. This was very collaborative, very thoughtful. Early child education, they call that grade R in South Africa. And it was rolled out first in the Western Cape. It's one of 9 provinces. And this kind of allowed them to customize the financing and management by the provincial body. So they started in one specific area to make sure it was successful in that area. It was actually a 3-year process of just to incorporate it into the system. And at the end of that 3-year period, all external funding stops. Like it stops after 3 years. And incorporation into the system means that all the rules and funding that apply to primary, secondary, and early childhood also would apply to this solution. So the rules that the system plays by this early childhood math program had to play by. And that will become increasingly important as we go on in this presentation. All right. So when I say it was integrated from the system from the start, sustainability was planned in advance. Let me give you an example. They had to ensure that they had enough subject advisor before the rollout even began. There was 3 languages of instruction, and the materials were put on Creative Commons for open access. That way they could reduce the cost to other areas who had to reproduce the materials, just put it up there. Public schools teachers in South Africa are contractually required to receive 80 hours of professional development a year. But here's what's important about that detail, is they are not allowed to take place during the school day. So when they were designing this math program, they had to design the professional development to take place either on weekends or on holidays. And that's an important part of understanding how the system works so that you can design that from the get-go. Instructional dosage was 1.4 hours per day, or about 224 hours in an academic year. So they had to build the system around that parameter. And also meeting requirements for the materials to be included. There's like this supplemental catalog for all of the materials that can be used in the classrooms. So they knew what are those parameters in order for us to get our materials into that catalog so that schools can just order them as we get integrated. And so is it the price per unit for the materials? Is it the size? Is it the color? Is it the materials? Is it the printer? What is it? But they knew these requirements. Now, there's others, but I'm just giving you a few examples here. All right. Now, the government finance mechanism with this is super interesting. And this is why I'm focusing on it, is because just because you have one solution does not mean that your solution will be financed from one line of a government budget. Let me show you here. Okay, so on the left side of this, we have cost categories and resources. So there's like overhead, there were block trainings and dry runs. And under the block trainings and dry runs, you can see different people, like the project manager, the trainers, the grade R specialists, the training guides, right? Then we had school-based cluster workshops, and those were facilitators guides. They needed those. Monitoring subject advisors was in there, and teaching and learning support materials. So what's actually used in the classroom. Okay, check out the right side now, the financing mechanism. The first 4 say none. It's not that there were no costs. It's either that those costs were financed from the donors, and so there was no cost to the government. Okay, there was no cost to the government on those, and they were due to phase out. So it could be one or the other, that they were either financed by external funders and they phased out. That's why it says none, because the government doesn't have to worry about that. However, okay, now check out the trainer's guide. That came from budget line 2.1. And so you think, great, everything's going to come from 2.1. You look at facilitator's guide. Yep, it comes from 2.1. Okay, so everything's going to come from 2.1. Nope. Now you go to monitoring subject advisors. That comes from budget line 2.3. Okay, it's still in the twos, but still it's a different budget line. So that everything must be coming from that 2 block in the budget. Nope. Classroom materials comes from the norms and standards budget. And so you can see, even just for these 1, 2, 3, 4 resources that are needed, then it's being pulled from 3 different budget lines. Now, think, for example, to your solution and how many things might have to be financed from the government and on the government side. And then you will now have to start thinking about which line is that going to come from. Okay, I'm going to pause. Questions, comments, concerns? How do you feel about that? Because we're going to roll into an example and an exercise right now. So this is a great time to ask me questions if this isn't clear. Okay, go. And if you don't have questions, great. But if you do, I'd love to hear them. Okay, thanks, Caroline.
We've got a question from Eshwar, so feel free to unmute and it would be great to hear your question.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Not sure if this is going to be something we come to in a bit, but obviously an important part of that is understanding, or being able to access and understand government budgets and that kind of information. And so, is this for which you have to have already had a level of partnership that either they're doing that with you, they're going through this process, but if you're pitching a solution to them to say that this is what we recommend, to map out the level of what costs will be funded by donors and philanthropy versus government, that is something that you could do. But then to get into like where it would be financed by, presumably that's a step that's entered into once there's an understanding of partnership, and then the government is mapping that for themselves.
Fair. So I think it depends very much on the relationship that you have with the government. Some are really built over a long period of time. There's a really deep sense of trust, which is critical to these relationships, in which case, yes, as you're co-collaborating with the government, this is the ideal time to talk about what the government will need to finance and how it will be financed. So you're right to say, from the beginning, when you're co-collaborating, that is by far the best time for this to happen. If that is not possible, that the co-collaboration didn't happen from the beginning, or the relationship doesn't feel as I don't want to say safe, but like you can't have as much of a candid conversation because maybe the government is expecting you to come in as an expert in this. And so if that's the case, then something that I like to do in these situations is to do my research beforehand. So at least I walk in and I have some baseline understanding of where how the different resources are currently being financed. And so I may not go to my primary contact in the Minister of Ed to do that if I feel like my positioning is really critical and I don't want to I want to come in more prepared, then I'm going to go source this out and I'm going to find this out beforehand. And this is just like playing detective. And you can easily get the government budgets and just start asking people and tracking down where do teacher salaries come from? How do they finance improvements in the schools? Where does that come from? And people will know at different levels of the government. It doesn't mean you have to go to your primary person for this if you don't feel like you can. Does that make sense? Or do people feel differently about that? Ashwar, you're okay with that? Okay.
We've got some questions in the chat as well for you, Christine.
Yeah, so let me see. Numerous stakeholders need to engage, not just one department in the ministry. You're absolutely right, Sam. What are the likely costs to the government agrees to fund more easily? Is it training materials and resources? I mean, you can absolutely have these conversations, and you should be having these conversations. And it could vary based upon maybe not necessarily departments, but governments in different countries are structured very differently in how they're financing their solutions. So that's also what makes moving from one country to another country with the same solution real tricky, like really tricky. So you can't just pick it up and kerplunk it in a different, kerplunk is a technical term, and put it in a different country because that financing mechanism might be, and the rules you're playing by, all different. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to the next thing. And this is going to be an exercise we're going to do together. So in your handouts, and also GSF was lovely and set this up for us. We're going to give you a template to work on, and we're going to put you in groups, and I'm going to ask for Tej's help with this. But here are the 4 questions that you're going to address. 1, I want you to list 5, just 5 resources that you will need from the government to implement your solution. And then I'm going to ask you, what do you need from this resource? I know that doesn't make sense at this moment. I'm going to give you an example. 3, what are your expectations from those resources? And are these realistic? And can you line up the needed government resources with the government budget line? Okay. I don't expect any of that to make sense to you, but this should. All right. Sorry, it's a little small. Hopefully you can see it okay. Step 1. What are the government resources needed to implement your solution? Again, just 5. We're just doing 5. So is it subject advisors? And so if so, you'll put, for example, subject advisors. What do you need from this resource in order for your solution to be successful? Maybe you need subject advisors to visit schools once per week. Are the expectations for this resource realistic? In this case, I'm saying no, because in reality, the subject advisors actually only visit the schools every few months. And so if we're leaning in hard on subject advisors to visit the schools once per week, but they actually in reality only go a couple of times a month, you might need to rethink. Like, is it possible to shift that so they actually can go every week? Or is that an unrealistic expectation? And is that going to affect potentially the success of your solution? And does this align with the government budget? Like, is there a line that will allow maybe more advisors so that they can go more often? Maybe not. Maybe not. We might not be able to get this from the budget. Schools. Let's use schools. So let's say, for example, you need schools for training, let's say once a quarter. Are expectations for this resource realistic? Yeah, we can. That's probably very doable. We can use the schools on weekends or on holidays when they're empty. Does that line up with the government budget? Meaning, does this require any additional cost from the government? And is it in line with the budget? Yep, it's in line with the budget. That's going to work. So we're going to put you in groups and we're going to have you just pick one person, like one organization, one solution to focus on, and come up with 5 different resources that you need. What you need from this resource, is what you need realistic to what's happening in the system? Why or why not? And does this align with the government budget? Okay, any questions on this?
Before that, if I can just ask everyone to click on the link and let us know if you're able to access it. A thumbs up or an okay in the chat will work. And while I wait for you to ask questions on this breakout is also designed a little bit differently. So as we had asked in the session, we had asked you to come with multiple of your colleagues, and several organizations have done that. So where there is a majority, I have named the breakouts by the name of the organization, and then I have added in other people who can listen in and help them peer learn through this. So we have a group on Crystal House, we have a group on Luminos Fund, and we have a group on EOF and DG Murray Trust, because there are more than one person in each of these. But I've also added in other people who can listen in and take notes, or if they want to talk about their solution, do that. If anything is unclear, please let us know. It's going to be a 20-minute breakout. Christine, back to you.
That's perfect. I was just going to say it's the bottom of the hour now. We'll give you 15 to 20 minutes. We'll circle around. But if you have questions, just give us a shout, because this is the primary thing that we want you to take away from this session. So if it's not clear, you just talk to us, okay?
If you're in a mixed group, please pick one solution amongst yourselves and then fill it in together with your peers in that particular group.
Are there any questions before we put you into the breakout rooms?
I have a question. This is Evan from Crystal House. So the work that we do is school-based. So we run a network of schools specifically, and only. We don't run scalable projects, or we don't do things in tandem with the government or leveraging government resources other than per pupil funding, primarily. So in that instance, just looking at step 1, and I'm not trying to be limiting, but really the governmental resource that we rely on is per pupil funding. In certain instances, we may use government textbooks, but I think that is very, very minimal, to be 100% honest. And we're never utilizing government personnel to manage our programming. So just want to make sure that we can use an example that's realistic, or pass to another organization that does more scalable projects that leverages multiple government resources. So just wanting to get your thoughts, Christine, team.
You can do either one. It might, I mean, if your only lean into the government is the per pupil expenditure, like, then just put that. And that is perfectly fine. If that's the only thing you have, that's the only thing you have. For this exercise, if people want to focus on things that are more scalable and slightly more complicated, maybe that would be helpful to them. But whatever the reality is, I don't deal well in hypothetical. And so whatever it is, it is. So just put it down and then we'll deal with it as it comes. Thanks, Evan.
I think there's just another question from Paul in the chat.
We're assuming that the government budget and financing work plans are completely in line. Not all governments do activity-based spending, more likely to have a sign. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And so whatever your situation is with the government in your particular context, I want you to work in that framework. Also, I am keenly aware that budgets versus expenditures in governments can be the difference between fiction and nonfiction. All we're trying to do right now, though, is focus on the budget and whatever that budget looks like, and to understand where the financing would come from, potentially come from, for your solution in a particular environment. Does that help, Paul? I don't know if we helped Paul. We did help Paul. Thanks, Paul. Okay. But whatever it is, Paul, you just like, yes, if it's more likely to have for particular input lines, even better. Like that's even better because it's the level of specificity that will be most helpful. Okay, I'll stop talking now and have everybody go into their groups unless there are other questions so that people can get started on that. Thank you so much.
Final advice on the groups. Once you find the document, I think everyone has been able to access it, just not scroll down to the number that corresponds to your meeting room so that we're not all filling the same part of the document. So each group is working on their own separate table. And then, Christine, how long do you want in the breakout rooms?
Let's go 15 minutes and let's check and see how everybody's doing.
Yeah, let's do 15. Is that okay, Tej?
Ready to open all the rooms now.
Great. Everyone got there.
I'll hand it back to Christine.
Okay, so we were right in the middle of a really good question in breakout group 5. And so whoever was speaking, I couldn't see the names, was asking that question. It was such a good question. Can you please start again with that?
Yeah, so I think it was me. Sorry, this is Sam from Link Education, and we were using a solution from Patrick. I can't remember the name of your organization, I'm afraid, Patrick. And it was an interesting solution about training teachers to be digitally competent. And that is embedded within the Kenyan curriculum. And so therefore, the assumption is the government would have the resources to pay for this training, along with the devices and the electricity and power grid that's needed in order to power the devices, in order to train the teachers to become digitally competent. And the table, I thought, was slightly confusing in that we were saying, yes, that we thought this was all realistic within the government budget because it's in the curriculum. However, is it really realistic when we know that governments are very strapped for cash, and it's very unlikely that the Kenyan government is going to have enough budget across all its different ministries to pay for the electrification of Kenya in order to power the devices for this curriculum ask? So I guess that's where I was getting a bit confused about that particular column on the table.
And so how would you rephrase that, Sam? If I were to rewrite that question, instead of asking if it's realistic, how would you suggest I rephrase that?
My brain doesn't work that quickly.
Oh.
So I'll have a think, but other people could jump in and come up
your
with
point is well taken. And it is exactly what we're talking about. It is exactly what we're talking about. Because in my mind, then that resource is, especially if you're leaning into it so hard, is going to be potentially problematic. Like if you have huge connectivity issues, it doesn't mean you don't do it. It doesn't mean you stop there. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means realize what you're dealing with and how that can affect the success of your solution. Just be realistic about what is planned versus what actually is happening out there.
Yeah.
But your point is spot on. It's spot on. Okay. Other questions from people as you were going through this? I'm super happy to take any that you have. Otherwise, we can move to like having a couple of people kind of present what they came up with. But I'm quite happy to take questions first if that's what you would like to do. Okay. No other questions? All right, Kara, how should we go about people, like what I'd like to do is have like one or two
Yeah,
groups
I
kind of
could
talk through their solutions, and then we can have other people chime in on things that are notably different in their solutions.
So I can present, and then you just tell me where to scroll, which solution we're going to be talking about, and you can describe it that way.
Okay, so we should probably pick some victims.
Yeah,
So-
or volunteer.
Volunteers. And so let's start with that. If there's any particular group that wants to volunteer, especially if you really want to hammer out something that was a little complicated or didn't make sense, then you would be a great group to start with. But any volunteers are fine, whatever makes sense to people.
I think I can volunteer so that we can look at what Sam Ross was asking. I think
And
we did it.
which group were you?
We did in number 5.
Great. Just let me navigate to the right place.
So as she opens, Kenya Connect is a young organization that is working in rural areas. And our work is to make sure that the students get quality education. And one of the things that we do is supporting teachers in several ways. And we chose in our group just to mention or to talk about teacher training in technology. So we were looking at some of the things that we need, like the personnel. We use teachers that are government employed, so that we just need to train them and support them so that they can be able to run the curriculum. Maybe to bring you to the limelight, Kenya is running a new curriculum that is now currently in grade 9. And teachers, one of the core competencies in the new curriculum is digital literacy or digital competency. And to support the government and also to support the teachers, we want to make sure that the teachers are not skipping the curriculum areas where they need to teach about coding, they need to teach about basic computer skills. And before we came in, most of the teachers were just skipping that. So how do we do? And with our group, we were discussing about what we need. And I remember like, are your expectation of this resource realistic? For us, it can be realistic because it is the government who developed the curriculum. But the question would be, does the government have the resources, for example, to give or to build infrastructure, which is power grid to all schools, and also to support schools with internet connectivity? So it is our realistic that this should be the case, but does the government have the budget lines to do that? So that was, as Sam was asking, something that we realized that it can be our realistic, yes, but what about when it comes now to the government allocation of funds, and especially in the education sector? And where are these funds going to be taken from. If, like, for example, in Kenya, we talk about government supporting schools or having budgets to support schools or to support basic education, but you find that they are always under budget. So I don't know whether the government will take some of the money for supporting the basic education to buy maybe laptops for schools or to buy or to connect to schools with internet. So I don't know, is there anything else that we can add, like, although this is our expectation, does the government have the budget lines on that? Yeah.
All right, so that is well done, very well done. And so I'm gonna prod you a little bit with more questions, okay, Patrick? So line number one, teachers. Okay, the A, are you dealing with ghost teacher situations or teacher absenteeism? Is that any type of problem? That's number one. Number two, training these teachers. So the government may say, we have the budget to train them, but they don't actually train them. Like, it doesn't actually happen. And if it doesn't actually happen, but you're leaning into it happening, that potentially could be a problem. So we're talking about not just what is planned, but what actually happens. And so if you're saying to train the teachers, we need a week, 3 times a year, is that even possible given the system and how it's currently running? That may be what they say they're gonna do, but sometimes it's just not possible for lots of reasons. Like, systems are complicated. And so I would ask you to think a little bit more about the teachers. Are you dealing with ghost teachers? Do you have absentee issues? What do the teacher training situation actually look like? Does the funding actually, is there a line for that? So that's number one. The devices, even though there's digital competency as a part of the curriculum, does not at all mean that the government can potentially fund those devices. Like, what does that look like? And also there was Sam's point about the infrastructure and the power issues. And again, I'm not trying to say that you throw out your solution and start over. I'm just saying that we try to make your solution as successful from the start by dealing with the existing challenges that are there and the existing strengths, because it's not all bad. Systems it's hard to change a system. And so those strengths that exist, we double down on those. The ones that are kind of wobbly, that they're still working on, just know they're wobbly and work within that. And so that's what I'm saying with this. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. All right. All right. Does anybody else have questions or want to talk about any challenges that they had? Otherwise, we can move to the next part, but I really want to stay here to make sure everybody gets as much from this as possible. Oh, Swati, what did you say? Maybe questions 2 and 3 that help us answer if the government would be willing to fund this. Can you say more on that?
I think it's a lot of what you shared, Christine, the follow-up questions that you asked, Patrick. I think when we are answering, are our expectations of this resource realistic? Some of those questions will help us really answer whether the government whether it would be realistic for the government, and what are those questions that can help us arrive at that answer, because I think that's what a lot of us have been discussing. While we may think it's realistic, but would it be realistic for the government, and what are questions that can help us answer that? And I think some of the follow-up questions you asked did help us come to that. So how can we have questions like that we can ask ourselves before we answer that question? That's what I meant.
Okay, great. Because, listen, guys, my deepest wish is for all of you to be profoundly and ridiculously successful. Like, it is my deepest wish, especially in these times. There is nothing more than I want than to see you guys posting on LinkedIn about how successful you are, about how your collaborations are going, about how it's so much of a group come together effort. Like, I want nothing more than this right now. And however, exercises like this can help get you there so you can have these conversations with government. I want to give that to you. I want to help you do there. I want to help you get to that point. And so this is just let's just be aware of where we are in the moment. Money's bad, systems are sometimes wobbly, but we still got a job to do. And it might be the most important job currently on this planet. Okay, I feel strongly about this stuff. All right. If you don't have any other questions, then I'm going to move to the next part. Okay. All right. Let me go back to sharing my screen. We had like user error on that just a minute ago. Let me see if I can do this. Okay.
Yeah,
There
we
we
can
go.
see it.
Excellent. Okay, we've already done this. Okay, we've already talked to you guys about group reflections. So here's some key points that I want you to take away from this is one, the list of externally funded resources for this early grade math was really short, and you couldn't see the list, but you should know because you saw exactly what the government had to fund. It's really limited, really strategic. So funders have to fund what is strategically necessary to lift it, to move it, to get the system going, whether it's for example, JICA. JICA is genius at this. JICA will do these one big time lifts for books or for trainings or whatever it might be. Like there's the one time cost versus reoccurring cost, right? And they're fantastic at doing these one time big lifts to move a system this way, move it forward. So the resources that are financed have to be strategic and often temporary. So that's number one. Two, some of the resources were only needed on a temporary basis, said that big costs were funded by donors. They only were paying the replacement cost for materials. That's super important, and making sure that that replacement cost is actually realistic, feasible, whatever, however we want to say that, but it's within the realm of reality. Like asking them to pay $20 per textbook, not happening. And it's really impossible for governments to cover any big development or one-time costs. So as you're thinking about it, think about these things. Okay, any questions on that, or are we okay still? I think we're okay still. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, here's something else I want you to think about, and this is kind of the last point that I'm going to make in these last 5 minutes here, is there's a very big difference in how governments think about costs. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 examples. One example is where governments think about it on a per student expenditure basis. Okay, this is the cost. Other governments, however, think about cost, the incremental cost. What is not included in the budget? This is critical to your life. Here's why. It's because when you are talking to the government, you need to understand, A, how do they think about costs? Do they think about cost in what is in the budget versus what's not in the budget? So what's not in the budget, they actually think of that as a cost, but things that are already covered in the budget are paid for. So it's not a cost. They don't think about it. So it is extremely important when you're talking to governments that you understand how they think about, and different people in the governments can think different ways, but we have to speak their language. So let me go back to the early childhood math costs. So costs that are included in the budget are specialized personnel, like project managers, training, grade R specialists. Those are included in the cost. Development, and that was funded by, like the initial lift was funded by the funders. Development, production, and distribution of the materials included in the budget, so the initial funders, and catering and transportation. So let me just be clear. On the left side, those are the only things that they thought of as actually being costs. The other things on the other side and excluded costs are things that are already in the budget. So they think of them as free. They're free. Like staff personnel salaries, they're already paid for. Teachers' salaries, they're already paid for. Subject advisors, paid for. Free, 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 free. Not free, but that's how they think about it. And so in your mind, not only do you understand, hopefully from this, but what resources you need from the government versus what's in the budget, what's not in the budget, and how the government thinks about that. Because they may say, you know what, we want the total cost. We want all of it. fine. You give them the total cost. But if they only think about it in terms of the incremental cost, that's a life-changing, very different situation. Does that make sense? If anybody's confused on that, just tell me that I did a terrible job of explaining that. Okay. So far, so good. Okay. So let me just ask you, and maybe you don't know, how the government that you work with thinks about cost. Do they think about in the total cost, like what's in and outside the budget? They want to know the total cost, or do they think about it as the incremental cost of what is not in the budget, or do they think about it some other way? And so let me just pause for a minute. Do people know how their governments think about cost? Incremental. Generally incremental, very much incremental. Does anybody else know? And if you don't know, just tell me you don't know. Two, Paul? Incremental also? Is anybody seeing their governments talk about costs in terms of the total cost, what's in and outside the budget? Or is there anybody who, or some other way other than incremental? Maybe two, but not sure. That's fair answer. Fixed cost. Abdul, do you mean fixed costs in terms of what is in the budget or what isn't in the budget? Can you say more on fixed cost? Fixed costs in the budget. Okay. So sorry, is that still like they want the total cost for what it will be, like whether it's in the budget or not in the budget, or just incremental, what's not in the budget? What's in the budget only? Oh, okay, total cost. Okay. So if it's total cost, then it's maybe what's in the budget, what's not in the budget together, as opposed to just what's not in the budget. Okay, Anne is saying two. Okay, so I will stop harping on that. But parallel question. Okay, what's our parallel question? As an organization, when we work with governments, what should we say is the budget unlocked by the government? Can you, I'm going to need words on that. If you could unmute, that would be super helpful.
Sure. So, we're an organization that works with the government to help them make career education as part of the school curriculum. Now, when we work with governments, there are different aspects under making it part of the curriculum that we know and acknowledge. And some of these, much like you said, can be incremental costs, and some of them could be just costs that were already there in the budget. So when we kind of talk as an organization to say what budgets have we unlocked in the government towards career education, do you have any recommendations on whether, generally organizations talk about total costs or are they incremental costs? Because that's something we've been trying to answer of late.
So is your question how you should approach that with the government and what you should say?
Not necessarily with the government, but just generally in the ecosystem, how do you talk about what budgets you've unlocked with the government?
So generally in the ecosystem, honestly, I start with a total cost for all stakeholders. Like, I don't care who you are. If you are funding some resource in a solution, then I'm going to start with that. And like my work will often have like, okay, I think an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm just going to draw an Excel for you. Okay. So like in the far left column, I'm going to put all the resources, blah, 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 whatever it is. I don't care if it's donated. I don't care if it's paid for. I don't care what it is. You just tell everything that you need. Like, what's the list, right? And then across the top, I'm going to put who is going to provide that resource. Are they going to pay for it, or are they going to donate it? Because you also might have a situation where you have communities, and maybe some solutions are really leaning into communities. and they need parents. They have in one situation where parents are really engaged and really passionate about the solution, and they're on it, and it works there. But then you can move down the road or into a different area in the same country, and the parents just can't get their heads around it. They're too busy working to try and just survive, to try and put food on the table. They don't have the extra bandwidth that they can give on this. And, we get it. We get it. We've all been in different situations in our lives. They just can't get there. And so that's why it's helpful to understand it works here. But when you look at all the resources needed and who needs to provide those resources, you might have a challenge moving it over here. And so when I think about cost, I always start with everything and everybody, and thinking about what's recurring and what is just like a one-time cost, because I'm trying to find those areas that are going to potentially be roadblocks that are going to keep you from being successful. And we want to move those roadblocks. We want to get them out of the way so that you can be, to the extent possible. I hope that helps.
Got it. I might reach out offline to continue the discussion, but yeah, I know we're also short of time.
No problem. Just reach out to GSF and they'll do their magic behind the scenes. Okay, any other questions on this?
This is also, just to say, a great plug for session 2, which is going to be happening next week, where we're going to be back with Christine, looking very much at the thing that she was just describing, sort of looking holistically at your solution and how do you break down the costs, and be very intentionally interrogating who is actually going to be paying for these costs, which ones are reoccurring, which ones are just one-off costs, and how to sort of look for those roadblocks and how to unblock them. So if you want to also continue the conversation, please join us next week, when we're going to be still staying with governments that are going to be part of the discussion, but it's going to be also wider about just looking at the overall financing of your solution and where that's coming from as your solution develops and grows.
Okay. I'm going to move on unless there are any other questions, but I trust you'll raise your hand, unmute, or ask it in the chat. All right, so here's what I want you to hopefully take from this is speak your government language. However your government thinks about cost, speak in that way so that you guys are on the same page. Different government officials within a system may think about costs differently. So just because one thinks about it one way, others may think about it in another way. Different government officials across systems will definitely think about costs differently. So understand that there is going to be some variability. Just be sensitive to it so that you can line up with how they think and make everybody's life easier. Okay. So let me give you just some practical tips as we wrap up here. And we're running right on time, so I'm thrilled with that. So locate and understand how line item government budgets align with your solution, just like we talked about. Speak the government's language, just like we talked about. Be aware of who's really making the finance decisions and how those decisions are made. When I'm working with organizations, I will often tell them to understand the government like they understand their own family. Like you need to understand them at a DNA level. Know the system you're working within, know the past wins, the past challenges, understand the election cycles. If there's an election coming up, you probably don't want to be talking about how bad the education system is. You probably want to be talking about the wins and how to lean into those wins. Public opinions on topics directly related or tangentially related to your solution, be really keenly attuned to those. Know what the funder sees as their priority goals, the government that is, and identify any roadblocks that are preventing them from getting there. Some of these are tiny pebbles. We want to flick those pebbles out of the way, get them out of there. Some of those are much bigger challenges, but to the extent possible, what are the government's goals, and let us help get you there, because we're probably all on the same page and wanting to move this forward. Be sensitive to current political, financial, and social winds of change. And the number one thing that I hope that you will take from this is trust. That the biggest issue in working with governments is trust, because there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake with this. There's election cycles at stake. People's lives are at stake. A lot of money is at stake. And so trust is probably and that's why I put it last, because it is literally the bottom line. Questions from you? Otherwise, I'm done. I've hopefully imparted what you need to know to help you guys, even just a small amount, move forward. It's my deepest wish. I think we're good then. All right, Kara, I will pass it back to you. It's been absolutely my honor.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you very much for participating and thinking with us through these solutions and what are the different resources that are needed and testing the assumptions. I think for me as well, one of the kind of benefits of these exercises is just figuring out what is it that you know and what is it that you don't know, and therefore what do you need to find out? What are some of the assumptions that need testing, and with whom? So yeah, thank you very much for that. We are hopefully going to see all of you and more people on the next call next week that we just introduced. If you still are not signed up for that, we'll be sharing an email with you to remind you to sign up for session 2. Bring your colleagues as well. And for now, please fill out the poll, the quiz, the survey. I think there's also a space for kind of free text box. So if there is something that you really want us to cover next week, please put that in the poll as well, so we can take that into account when we are doing final planning of the next week's session.
Bye, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Please do the poll and then you're free to go.